The wind, raw and relentless, swept across the deserted platform of Willow Creek Station, carrying the fine grit of the Montana plains. It stung Emma Wilson's eyes, already red-rimmed not just from dust, but from unshed tears, and whipped loose, strands of brown hair across her face, a frantic dance against the faded fabric of her traveling dress. She clutched her thin wool shawl tighter, a meager shield against the biting air and the vast, indifferent sweep of the landscape. It felt less like a place, and more like an accusation. Hours. It had been hours since the steam engine, that iron beast carrying all her fragile hopes, had hissed and sighed its way back toward civilization, leaving her stranded at what felt terrifyingly like the edge of the known world. Her trunk sat beside her on the weathered planks, heavy and incongruous, a solitary monument to a future that had evaporated like morning mist. Inside, packed with meticulous care, lay her few treasured books, practical clothing, meager savings, and the carefully composed photograph that had been both passport and deception. The image showed a pleasant-faced woman, seated demurely, intelligence shining in her eyes but cleverly concealing the slight persistent drag in her left leg, a cruel souvenir from a childhood fever that had stolen not just her grace of movement but, in the stifling drawing rooms of Boston, her prospects. Thomas Harrington. The name, once a beacon promising escape and solid ground, now echoed with bitter irony. A rancher. His advertisement in the Matrimonial Times had spoken of stability, honest work, a life built under open skies, far from the suffocating pity, and her mother's thinly veiled shame that defined her Boston existence. 8 months of correspondence had followed. His letters, practical and straightforward, described the rhythms of ranch life, his hopes for a companionable marriage. Hers, penned late at night by flickering lamplight, were cautious marvels of curated truth. She revealed her intellect, her proficiency with household accounts and sums, her quiet nature, her longing for purpose. She never mentioned the limp. It was a gamble born of desperation, clinging to the fragile hope that this Western man might value substance over surface, unlike the polished Boston suitors whose interest had invariably cooled upon discovering her imperfection. He was supposed to be here, waiting on this very platform, his presence the tangible proof that her desperate flight across the continent, the burning of bridges back home, had not been in vain. But the station agent, a man whose eyes held the weary resignation of someone who'd seen too much disappointment roll through this town, had delivered the news with gruff sympathy hours ago. Thomas Harrington wasn't coming, not delayed, not changed his mind, dead. A riding accident, swift and brutal, 2 weeks before her arrival. 2 weeks she had spent on the train, dreaming of a life that no longer existed. The agent had offered condolences, mumbled something about the unpredictability of life out here. He'd inquired gently enough if she possessed funds for a return. Ticket. Return? The word lodged like a stone in her throat. Return to what? To the overstuffed parlor where her mother endlessly lamented Emma's spinsterhood, polishing silver while polishing her criticisms. To her kind but ineffectual father, whose silent sympathy was a balm that couldn't heal the wound of her limited future. To the whispered assumptions that she would become a permanent fixture, the maiden aunt, a burden gracefully borne but a burden nonetheless. No, return was unthinkable. She had poured every cent of her small inheritance, every ounce of her desperate courage into this one-way passage. The bridge back east was ashes. Panic, cold and sharp as a shard of ice, constricted her breathing. Alone, disabled in a way that felt profoundly significant in this rugged, demanding land. Thousands of miles from anything familiar. Dwindling funds. A future stretching before her as barren and unforgiving as the plains under the vast pale sky. She sank onto her trunk, the movement making her limp more pronounced even to herself, a physical manifestation of her broken hopes. Hot, humiliating tears threatened, blurring the stark lines of the station house, but she blinked them back fiercely, swallowing the lump in her throat. Crying wouldn't conjure a solution. She had survived the fever that nearly killed her. Survived the subtle cruelties of Boston society, survived the crushing weight of her own self-doubt to make it this far. She wouldn't crumble now. Not entirely. But the question hammered relentlessly. What now? Where could she possibly go? The rhythmic crunch of boots on the wooden planks drew her gaze upward. Her hand instinctively smoothed the wrinkles from her skirt, a nervous habit ingrained by years of trying to deflect attention, to appear ordinary. A man stopped a respectful few feet away. He was tall, leanly built, dressed not in finery but in practical denim trousers, a sturdy chambray shirt, and a leather vest worn smooth with use, function over fashion. His hat, dusty from the road, was pushed back slightly, revealing dark hair liberally streaked with gray at the temples. But it was his eyes that held her attention. A startling clear blue, they held a shrewd, assessing quality that bypassed pity and went straight to appraisal. It made her posture straighten instinctively. "Waiting long, ma'am." His voice was level, deep, carrying the unhurried cadence of the West. It wasn't unkind, just direct. Emma hesitated. The polite, vague explanation she might have offered died on her lips. Honesty felt like the only currency she had left, however devalued. She managed, her voice tight, betraying the tremor she fought to control. "I arrived this morning. I was meant to meet Mr. Thomas Harrington." The man's expression shifted, a flicker of understanding crossing his weathered features. "Ah, Tom." He didn't offer platitudes. "Heard about the accident. Bad business. Damn shame." He paused, his gaze taking in the solitary trunk, her travel-worn clothes, the way she held herself with a rigid dignity that couldn't quite conceal the fear simmering beneath. "You'd be Miss Wilson, then? The lady Tom was corresponding with?" "From Boston?" Surprise flickered across her face, momentarily displacing the despair. "Yes. How did you—" "Small town, ma'am," he said, a hint of a wry smile touching his lips but not quite reaching those observant eyes. "News gets around, especially news concerning Tom Harrington and his intended bride." He gestured vaguely towards the dusty main street, where a handful of utilitarian buildings huddled together under the immense sky. "Look, it's getting on towards evening. The Harrington place is a fair ride out, good hour, maybe more. You can't stay here on the platform all night." She knew that. The knowledge pressed down, heavy and suffocating. I confess I don't know what I am to do," she admitted, the words barely a whisper, a crack appearing in her carefully constructed composure. This admission of helplessness chafed against her pride, but the reality was stark. The man considered her for a long moment, his blue eyes thoughtful. He seemed to weigh her situation, her vulnerability, perhaps even her potential resilience. "Name's Mason Reed," he offered finally. "I own the Silver Dollar, the dance hall just down the street there." He saw the faint widening of her eyes, the almost imperceptible stiffening at the mention of a dance hall, and preempted her likely thought. "Now, before you get the wrong idea, it's also got a few decent rooms upstairs, cleaner than the saloon and quieter than the bunkhouse. Point is," he continued, his tone practical, "I have some business that takes me out towards the Harrington spread later this evening anyway, checking on a supply order Jed, the foreman, placed. I can give you a ride out there in my buckboard. Least you can see the place, talk to Jed, maybe the housekeeper, get the lay of the land, figure things out from there. A dance hall owner." The words conjured images that clashed violently with her Boston sensibilities. Smoky rooms, raucous, music, rough men, women of questionable virtue. Yet Mason Reed's offer, stripped of sentimentality, was grounded in practicality. It was direct, perhaps the only tangible lifeline available in this desolate moment. Going to the Harrington ranch felt like twisting the knife in an already gaping and confronting the ghost of the life she'd lost. But where else was there? The street offered no sanctuary. "Thank you, Mr. Reed," she said, forcing strength into her voice, meeting his gaze directly. "That is unexpectedly kind." "Just practical, ma'am," he corrected gently, though his eyes held a flicker of something akin to respect for her attempt at composure. "No sense leaving you stranded. Let me get this trunk." He hefted the heavy trunk with an ease that spoke of lean strength, his movements economical, efficient. As Emma rose stiffly to follow, The fatigue and despair caused her weary leg to betray her, making her falter for a fraction of a second. She saw his gaze flick down, register the awkward movement, then immediately return to her face. His expression remained unreadable, neutral. He offered no comment, no gesture of assistance she didn't require, simply waited with quiet patience as she steadied herself and walked beside him towards a sturdy buckboard wagon hitched nearby. The ride was largely silent, punctuated only by the creak of the wagon wheels and the rhythmic clopping of the horses' hooves on the rutted track. Emma was too consumed by the wreckage of her plans, the daunting uncertainty ahead, and a bone-deep weariness to attempt conversation. Mason Reed seemed entirely content with the silence, his attention focused on navigating the trail, his profile etched against the vast, rolling landscape unfolding around them. It possessed a stark, untamed beauty, she acknowledged dimly, the muted golds and browns of the drying grasses under an endless sky, so utterly different from the manicured greens of Boston Common, but its wildness felt less like freedom and more like a threat, mirroring the harshness of her predicament. As they crested a rise, the Harrington place came into view, nestled in a shallow, protected valley. A sprawling, functional ranch house, built of sturdy timber, stood sentinel over a collection of outbuildings, barns, corrals, a bunkhouse. Even from a distance, it spoke of hard work, of a life carved from the land. A fresh wave of grief washed over Emma, sharp and piercing. This was it. This was the place Thomas had described in his letters, the solid foundation upon which she was meant to build her new life. Seeing it now, knowing its master was gone, that her presence here was an anomaly born of tragedy, felt like a cruel cosmic joke. Mason pulled the wagon to a halt near the porch of the main house. Before he could even set the brake, a grizzled man with hands gnarled by work and weather emerged, wiping sweat from his brow with a forearm. He wore the weary look of someone carrying unexpected burdens. "Mason," he acknowledged with a curt nod, his eyes flicking with open, unsurprised curiosity towards Emma. "Jed," Mason returned. "Ran into Miss Wilson at the station. She arrived this morning to meet Tom." Jedediah Franklin, the foreman, removed his hat, his weathered face falling into lines of genuine sympathy. "Aw, ma'am, heard you might be arriving soon. Terrible sorry about Tom. A damn shame, it truly is. And terrible sorry you came all this way for this." The bluntness, though not intended unkindly, struck Emma anew, reinforcing the finality of her situation. "Thank you," she murmured, looking down at her clasped hands. An awkward silence descended. Jed looked from Emma's pale, strained face to Mason's steady presence, clearly unsure what protocol demanded in such an unusual, tragic circumstance. Mason, ever practical, stepped into the breach. "Jed, Miss Wilson's had a long journey and some hard news. She needs a place to rest, gather her thoughts. Any chance Mrs. Gable could put her up for a night or two, just till she figures out her next step?" "Mrs. Gable?" Jed brightened slightly. "Sure thing, Mason. Martha'll fix her up. Least we can do." He explained briefly that Martha Gable was the ranch cook and housekeeper, a widow who'd worked for Tom for several years. He turned back to Emma, his manner rough but kind. "Come on in, ma'am. Let me fetch Martha." He ushered Emma towards the house. The interior was plain, solid, undeniably masculine. It smelled of wood smoke, worn leather, coffee, and the faint, lingering scent of the pipe tobacco Thomas had apparently favored. There were few feminine touches. Mrs. Gable, a plump, bustling woman with flour dusting her apron and kind, sympathetic eyes, emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands. She greeted Emma not with pity, but with a sort of maternal concern, clucking softly over her long journey and the shock she must have endured. She showed Emma to a small, clean room tucked under the eaves, sparsely furnished but with a sturdy bed and a window looking out onto the vast, silent prairie. Left alone, the door closed behind her, the carefully constructed dam of Emma's composure finally broke. She sank onto the edge of the narrow bed, and silent, racking sobs shook her frame. The dream wasn't just dead. It felt as though it had never been real, a foolish fantasy spun from desperation. The tears were not just for Thomas Harrington, a man she knew only through words on paper, but for the life she had dared to hope for, the escape she had craved, and the terrifying emptiness that now stretched before her. She stayed at the Harrington Ranch, a place that felt increasingly like a ghost haunting her, for 2 days. She tried to make herself useful, helping Mrs. Gable in the kitchen, mending linens, tasks that felt familiar yet utterly hollow in this context. Mrs. Gable was kind, offering food and quiet comfort, but her sympathy couldn't fill the void. Jed was preoccupied overseeing the ranch hands who were polite but understandably distant, their world focused on cattle and fences, not the unexpected presence of a grieving, displaced Eastern woman. It became painfully clear that this was not her place. It could never be her place now. The future remained a terrifying, featureless blank. Each sunrise brought a fresh wave of anxiety about her dwindling funds and non-existent options. On the third morning, as Emma sat numbly on the porch steps, staring out at the endless expanse of prairie that seemed to mock her confinement, the sound of an approaching wagon heralded Mason Reed's return. He swung down easily, tethering his horse, and approached the porch, his steps measured. He didn't waste time on idle pleasantries, leaning a shoulder against a porch post, his hat tipped slightly against the morning sun. "Miss Wilson," he began, his voice calm, businesslike. "I've been giving your situation some thought." Emma braced herself, straightening her spine. She expected more condolences, perhaps practical, unwelcome advice to wire her family for funds to return east. "You mentioned briefly back at the station," he continued, his clear blue gaze direct, "that you had experience with accounts, sums." She nodded cautiously. "Household accounts primarily, and assisting my father with his ledgers for his small import business. I am proficient with numbers, Mr. Reed, and meticulous by nature." "Good," he said. "My bookkeeper at the Silver Dollar, a young fellow more interested in prospecting rumors than balancing columns, abruptly decided gold dust held more appeal than ledgers. Left yesterday without much notice. Left me in a bit of a bind. Truth be told." He paused, letting the information settle. "The work requires a sharp head for numbers, absolute discretion, and unwavering reliability. It pays a fair wage, enough for respectable room and board in town, with some left over for saving or spending as you see fit." He held her gaze steadily. "It's not Boston society, ma'am. It's a dance hall in Willow Creek. There's noise, rough edges, but the work itself is honest. It needs doing properly. And it might give you a chance to get your feet under you. Earn your keep while you decide what comes next." Emma stared at him, momentarily speechless. Work? In a dance hall? The proposition was so far outside the realm of anything she had ever conceived, it felt surreal. The Silver Dollar. She pictured dimly lit rooms, the pounding of a piano, loud laughter, rough-hewn miners and cowboys, women with painted smiles. The very thought would send her mother into palpitations, confirm every dire prediction her Boston acquaintances might have whispered. It felt like stepping onto another planet. And yet, what was the alternative? Lingering here at the Harrington Ranch, an object of pity, a drain on their limited resources, was untenable. Returning to Boston, tail tucked between her legs, to face the "I told you so's" and the suffocating lack of prospects? Impossible. Mason Reed's offer, unconventional, even scandalous by her former standards, represented something tangible. Independence. A way to earn her own bread, to stand on her own 2 feet, albeit one less steady than the other. A foothold, however precarious, in this new, harsh reality. There was also something in his straightforward manner, his complete lack of judgment about her circumstances, his apparent indifference to her limp, seeing it, acknowledging it implicitly by not mentioning it, that inspired a fragile sliver of trust. He wasn't offering charity disguised as work. He seemed to genuinely need someone capable. "My skills are primarily in household and small business accounts," she repeated cautiously, wanting absolute clarity. "The finances of a dance hall might be quite different." Numbers are numbers, Miss Wilson, Mason said simply. Income, expenses, payroll, suppliers. What I need most is accuracy and honesty. The specific routines you can learn. He pushed himself off the post, his movement signaling the conversation's end. Think it over. No pressure. But the job's there if you want it. I can arrange a clean, quiet room for you at Mrs. Peterson's boarding house. It's respectable, run by a good woman. She looked out again at the vast landscape. It no longer seemed merely empty, but rather a terrifying, exhilarating blank slate. Boston represented a known suffocation. This job, this town, this unexpected offer from this observant, practical man, it represented a chance, a strange, improbable, potentially ruinous chance, but a chance nonetheless. Taking a deep, steadying breath, she met his waiting gaze. Mr. Reed, she said, her voice firmer now, laced with a resolve that surprised even herself. I accept your offer, and I thank you for the opportunity. A flicker of something, surprise, respect, maybe just acknowledgement, crossed his face before settling back into his usual neutral expression. Good, he said, nodding once. Pack your trunk. Be ready to leave in an hour. The Silver Dollar dance hall was, as Emma soon discovered, both better and worse than her apprehensive imagination had painted it. Cleaner, certainly. The wooden floors were scrubbed daily, the long mahogany bar gleamed under the lamplight, and a surprising degree of order prevailed, at least during the daytime hours, but it was also undeniably noisy, filled with the boisterous energy of miners flush with temporary fines, cowboys letting off steam after weeks on the range, merchants striking deals over whiskey, and the ever-present, sometimes jarringly cheerful, music from the piano player. Vivian Blackwood, the hall's manager, introduced herself on Emma's first morning. She was a striking woman, perhaps in her late 30s, with a cascade of fiery red hair piled fashionably high, sharp green eyes that missed nothing, and a dress that, while stylish, hinted at practicality beneath the ruffles. She carried herself with an air of unshakable confidence. She eyed Emma's plain gray dress, quiet demeanor, and carefully pinned hair with frank, undisguised assessment. So, Vivian said, her voice carrying easily over the low morning hum of cleaning and restocking, you're the new bookkeeper, Miss Wilson from Boston. There was a hint of challenge in her tone. Mason says you're smart and quick with figures. You'll need to be, and discreet. Her gaze lingered for a moment on Emma's slight limp as she followed her towards the back. This place runs on cash and credit, secrets and sweat. Keep your eyes on the ledgers and your mouth shut about anything else you might see or hear. She led Emma to a small, cramped office tucked away behind the bar area, buffered slightly from the main hall's noise but not immune to it. Ledgers, thick, heavy volumes, were piled high on a sturdy oak desk, alongside stacks of receipts, invoices, and scribbled notes. Your predecessor, Mr. Finn, Vivian stated dryly, gesturing at the chaotic piles, was more interested in the odds at the faro table than in double-entry bookkeeping. He left things untidy. Mason expects perfection, or as close as damn possible. Emma spent the ensuing weeks immersed in the financial entrails of the Silver Dollar. Untidy proved a colossal understatement. Finn had been, at best, spectacularly incompetent. At worst, deliberately obfuscating. Entries were mismatched, columns refused to balance, receipts were missing, and personal loans seemed to have been ambiguously recorded as business expenses. Methodically, painstakingly, Emma began the arduous task of untangling the mess. She worked long, grueling hours, often staying late after the music died down and the last patron stumbled out. The quiet hum of the empty hall a welcome respite. She found a strange, anchoring satisfaction in the cold logic and certainty of numbers, a sense of order she could impose on at least one small corner of this chaotic new world. Mason Reed rarely interfered directly with her work. He'd appear occasionally, sometimes late in the evening, to review her progress, ask a few pertinent questions, listen intently to her explanations, and depart with a quiet nod. He seemed to trust her competence implicitly, a trust that felt both validating and weighty. Vivian, initially cool and watchful, gradually thawed as she witnessed Emma's quiet diligence, her unwavering focus, and the undeniable skill with which she brought order to the financial chaos Finn had left behind. Vivian began offering pragmatic advice, delivered in her characteristic blunt style, on navigating Willow Creek's small-town dynamics, dealing with suppliers, and subtly deflecting the occasional unwanted attention from patrons who wandered too, close to the office door. "Keep your eyes down unless you mean business, honey," she'd advised early on, "and never let 'em see you flustered." Emma largely kept to herself, maintaining a polite but reserved distance from the swirl of activity. In the main hall, she took her meals at Mrs. Peterson's quiet boarding house down the street, a haven of relative normalcy populated by a few other solitary women, a seamstress, the schoolteacher. She avoided the dance floor entirely, acutely conscious of her limp and the stares it might attract in such a public, physically expressive space. The world of the silver dollar, the easy laughter, the loud music, the casual camaraderie between the soiled doves and the customers, the boozy flirtations, felt profoundly alien, a universe removed from the staid propriety she'd known. Yet, beneath the surface strangeness, a fragile sense of accomplishment began to take root. She was earning her own way. She was independent, reliant solely on her own skills and fortitude. It was a precarious independence, built on the shaky foundation of a dance hall's finances, but it was hers. One Saturday night, the silver dollar was particularly boisterous. A traveling fiddler had joined the regular piano player, injecting a wilder energy into the tunes. The dance floor was a swirling kaleidoscope of colorful calico skirts and sturdy denim trousers, the air thick with laughter, smoke, and the scent of whiskey and cheap perfume. Emma, ensconced in her office haven, was meticulously reconciling the week's bar receipts, trying to shut out the rising crescendo from the main hall. The office door opened and Mason Reed stood there. "Busy, Miss Wilson?" he asked, his voice pitched to be heard over the din. "Just finishing the weekly summary, Mr. Reed," she replied, carefully closing the heavy ledger. The noise from the hall seemed to surge into the small space. "Good," he said. He hesitated for a moment, a rare occurrence for the usually decisive man. His gaze met hers, direct and serious. "Miss Wilson," he began, his tone slightly different, less businesslike. "I know you generally prefer the quiet of the office, and I respect your diligence. But the music's lively tonight, and, well, everyone deserves a little enjoyment now and then, a break from the ledgers." He took a half-step back, extending his hand towards her. "Would you do me the honor of a dance?" Emma froze, her pen slipping from her suddenly nerveless fingers. Dance? Her? Here? In front of everyone? With her pronounced limp? A wave of pure, unadulterated panic tightened her chest, stealing her breath. Images flooded her mind. The averted eyes in Boston ballrooms, the polite murmurs of refusal, the carefully phrased excuses from potential partners, the burning shame. "Mr. Reed, I cannot," she stammered, feeling a hot flush creep up her neck. "I don't dance. My leg." She gestured vaguely, unable to meet his eyes. His gaze remained steady, unwavering, and crucially, held not a trace of pity. It was the same direct, assessing look he used for business, but softened slightly around the edges. "I'm not asking about your leg, Emma," he said quietly, using her first name deliberately, naturally. "I'm asking you." His hand remained outstretched, patient, strong, unyielding. "It's just a simple waltz, nothing strenuous. I'm a fair enough lead, won't step on your toes too badly." She looked at his outstretched hand, calloused from work yet surprisingly steady. Then she forced herself to look up, into his clear blue eyes. There was no mockery there, no hidden agenda she could discern, only a quiet, straightforward invitation. He saw her limp. Everyone in Willow Creek likely knew about it by now, gossip traveling faster than wildfire in a town this size. He knew, and he was asking anyway. He saw her, the woman behind the ledger and the limp. In that suspended moment, something shifted deep within Emma. a tiny spark of defiance against the accumulated years of shame and self-consciousness, a flicker of yearning to experience something simple, something normal, something potentially joyous even for just a few minutes. Consequences be damned. Slowly, hesitantly, battling a lifetime of ingrained reluctance, she placed her trembling hand in his. His grip was firm, reassuring, not crushing, but solid. He didn't make a fuss, didn't draw attention. He simply led her through the office doorway and onto the edge of the crowded, swirling dance floor. Heads turned, of course. She felt the weight of curious eyes, heard the momentary dip in the surrounding chatter, undoubtedly followed by whispers. But Mason seemed utterly oblivious, his attention focused solely on her. As the band swung into the gentle, familiar rhythm of a waltz, he guided her confidently into the steps. It wasn't graceful. Not like the effortless gliding she remembered watching with envious eyes in Boston. Her left leg dragged, making the turns slightly awkward, the rhythm uneven. She felt clumsy, exposed, bracing for the inevitable wave of humiliation, the feeling of being judged and found wanting. But Mason moved with her, seamlessly adapting his own steps, providing steady, unobtrusive support without making it obvious. He didn't try to hide her awkwardness or compensate for it overtly. He simply accommodated it, making it part of their shared movement, a variation on the theme. He looked down at her, not with scrutiny, but with a faint, genuine smile touching his lips, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Just follow the music, Emma," he murmured, his voice low, meant only for her. "And me. Don't think too hard." And somehow she did. She stopped thinking about her leg, about the watching eyes, about the years of feeling inadequate. She focused on his hand holding hers, warm and strong. She focused on the solid presence of his arm securely around her waist, guiding her. She focused on the rhythm of the music, letting it flow through her, letting him lead. For those few precious minutes, spinning somewhat unevenly but securely in Mason Reed's arms amidst the noise and chaos of the silver dollar, Emma felt a surprising lightness, a release she hadn't experienced since long before the fever had altered her life's trajectory. In that moment, she wasn't the abandoned mail-order bride with a limp. She wasn't the meticulous bookkeeper hiding in the back office. She was simply Emma, dancing. When the music finally ended, leaving her slightly breathless, he guided her calmly back towards the relative quiet of the office, the usual quiet intensity returning to his eyes. "Thank you, Emma," he said simply, releasing her hand. "Thank you, Mr. Reed," she replied, her voice still carrying a hint of breathlessness, a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with exertion and everything to do with the unexpected gift of normalcy, of being seen. That dance, awkward and brief as it was, marked a subtle but significant turning point. The invisible formal barrier between employer and employee seemed to thin, becoming more permeable. While maintaining professional boundaries, Mason began to consult her more frequently, not just on the neatness of the ledgers, but seeking her opinion on minor aspects of the business, supply orders, credit arrangements with certain merchants, staffing efficiencies. He seemed to value her sharp analytical mind and her careful, quiet observations. Emma, in turn, found herself observing him more closely, noticing things beyond his role as boss. She saw his intrinsic fairness with his staff, even the saloon, girls and roustabouts. She witnessed his shrewd but honest handling of difficult customers, diffusing potentially volatile situations with calm authority. She sensed the quiet integrity that underpinned his sometimes gruff exterior, and occasionally glimpsed a flicker of loneliness in his eyes, especially late at night when the boisterous energy of the silver dollar faded, leaving him alone at the polished bar. He was, she realized, a far more complex man than she had initially perceived, shaped by the harsh realities of the frontier, yet possessing a depth and decency she hadn't expected beneath the surface. Her meticulous work on the disastrous ledgers, left by Finn, had not only restored order, but it also saved Mason a significant amount of money by uncovering discrepancies and potential theft. Furthermore, her methodical analysis revealed vulnerabilities in his cash handling and credit procedures, which he promptly addressed based on her quiet suggestions. He expressed his gratitude not with effusive praise, which would have embarrassed her, but with a quiet, steady respect, conveyed through his actions and the increasing weight he gave her opinions. This unspoken acknowledgement meant more to Emma than any flowery compliment Boston society could have offered. One crisp afternoon, several months after her arrival, when the silver dollar was quiet between the lunchtime lull and the evening ramp-up, Mason called her into the main bar area, then motioned her towards his own slightly larger office behind it. He closed the door firmly behind them, a gesture that immediately signaled a conversation of greater weight than their usual brief consultations. "Emma," he began, settling into his worn leather chair behind the desk, gesturing for her to take the visitor's chair opposite. He didn't shuffle papers or avoid her gaze. "We need to talk about the Harrington place." Her heart gave a slight, involuntary lurch. She had consciously tried not to dwell on the ranch, the symbol of her shattered hopes. Thinking about it felt like probing a wound that hadn't fully healed. "Word is it's officially going up for sale," Mason continued, his voice even. "Turns out Tom had no close relatives nearby, just that distant cousin back east somewhere. Name's Jonathan, I believe Jed said. Apparently he's a scholar type, professor maybe, zero interest in ranching or Montana. The estate's finally being settled by lawyers back east and the whole shebang. Land, stock, water rights, everything. It's on the market." Emma nodded mutely, unsure where this was leading, but feeling a knot tighten in her stomach. "It seemed like a fine property," she murmured politely, remembering the brief, painful glimpse. "Well situated." "It is," Mason agreed, leaning forward slightly, his elbows resting on the desk. "Good water access, which is gold out here. Decent grazing land, solid house. Needs work, mind you. Tom was letting some things slide, maintenance-wise, even before the accident. Fences need mending, barn roof needs patching. But it has potential, serious potential." He paused, his blue eyes fixed on her with that unnerving, assessing intensity. "I'm thinking of buying it." This wasn't entirely surprising. Emma had quickly recognized Mason Reed as a savvy businessman, always alert to opportunities for investment and expansion beyond the silver dollar. "But," he went on, holding her gaze, "running a ranch properly, turning that potential into profit, that takes more than just capital. It takes constant oversight, meticulous management, trying to run it effectively alongside managing the silver dollar full-time. That's stretching one man too thin, especially if it's to be done right, built into something lasting." He leaned forward a fraction more. "Emma, you understand numbers better than anyone I know. You've got a sharp mind for detail, for organization, for making things run efficiently. You've proven that tenfold right here." He paused again. "And you're not afraid of hard work. I saw that even in the short time you were out there pitching in with Mrs. Gable. You understand order." He took a slow breath, his gaze never leaving hers. "So I'm proposing a partnership, a business proposition. I put up the capital, buy the ranch outright, invest what's needed for immediate repairs and maybe some better breeding stock. You manage the operational side, the books naturally, but also the supplies, overseeing the household accounts, working directly with Jed, who I definitely want to keep on as foreman. Essentially, you'd be the on-site manager, running the day-to-day. We run it together, Reed Wilson Ranch maybe. We split the profits, clean 50-50 once my initial investment is recouped. You'd live out there, of course, in the main house. It would be, well," he hesitated, a rare occurrence. "It would be the home you came west expecting in a way, just under significantly different circumstances." Emma was stunned into silence, her mind reeling. A partnership? Running a ranch? Him trusting her, Emma Wilson, with that level of responsibility, with such a significant financial venture? It was audacious, completely unexpected, and ignited a spark of something that felt dangerously like excitement deep within her. He wasn't offering charity, not a handout dressed up as a job. This was a genuine business proposition, based entirely on his assessment of her capabilities, the skills she had demonstrated right here in this cramped office. He saw her competence, her intelligence, not her limp or her status as an abandoned woman. He saw her potential, not her past misfortune. Mr. Reed, Mason, she corrected herself, the name feeling more natural now. I am honored by your trust, but I have absolutely no practical experience running a ranch. The sheer scale of it felt overwhelming. Neither did Tom Harrington when he first bought the place, I'd wager. Mason countered reasonably, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. Experience can be acquired. What can't be easily learned is intelligence, integrity, and grit. You have all three in spades, Emma. Jed knows cattle, knows the land like the back of his hand. You know how to manage resources, how to ensure things run smoothly and profitably. It strikes me as a potentially damn good combination. She thought about it, truly considered it, the initial shock giving way to a burgeoning sense of possibility. The image of the ranch house, no longer just a symbol of loss, but now shimmering with the potential for opportunity, for purpose. The immense challenge, the undeniable hard work involved, but also the chance to build something real, something tangible, something hers in a way, alongside a man who respected her for who she truly was, not despite her flaws, but perhaps in some small measure, because of the quiet strength those flaws had forged in her. It was a gamble, yes, just as coming west had been. But this time the odds felt different. This time she wouldn't be alone. This time the offer was based on her mind, not a misleading photograph. You truly believe I can do this? She asked softly, needing to hear the reassurance, needing to borrow some of his quiet confidence. Emma, he said simply, his sincerity unmistakable, his blue eyes holding hers captive. I wouldn't be proposing it if I didn't. I don't make foolish investments. Not in property, not in people. A slow smile spread across her face then, genuine and unreserved, lighting her features in a way Mason hadn't seen before. The weariness seemed to lift, replaced by a quiet determination. She extended her hand across the sturdy oak desk. All right, Mason, she said, her voice steady and clear. You have a partner. He took her hand, his grip firm, warm, calloused. It wasn't just a handshake sealing a business deal. It felt like the sealing of a pact, the closing of one uncertain chapter and the hesitant, hopeful opening of another. A future she couldn't possibly have imagined just months before, standing desolate on the Willow Creek Station platform. The purchase of the former Harrington property, soon formally rechristened the Reed Wilson Ranch, marked the beginning of a new, intensely demanding phase of Emma's life. Moving her few belongings from the quiet anonymity of Mrs. Peterson's boarding house into the spacious, echoing ranch house felt both daunting and strangely liberating. The house felt vast, at first haunted by the ghost of the life she might have had with Thomas Harrington, permeated by his absence. But the sheer volume of work needing immediate attention quickly drove away most melancholic thoughts, replacing them with practical concerns. Emma plunged headfirst into learning the complex intricacies of ranch management. She spent long hours, trailing Jed Franklin across pastures, her leg often aching fiercely by sundown, absorbing his knowledge of grazing patterns, water sources, spotting signs of illness in the cattle, the endless tasks of fence mending and seasonal preparations. She pored over supply catalogs from Miles City and even St. Louis, negotiating prices with merchants in Willow Creek with a shrewdness that surprised Jed, establishing a meticulous system for tracking every penny of income and expenditure, far more rigorous than the somewhat haphazard methods Tom Harrington had apparently employed. She learned to distinguish different brands, estimate the weight of steers on the hoof, and understand the subtle language of the land and the weather. The physical demands were significant. Days started before dawn and ended long after dusk. Her limp, a mere inconvenience in Boston or even at the Silver Dollar office, became a more constant nagging companion as she navigated uneven ground, climbed onto wagon beds, and spent hours on her feet overseeing tasks. Yet there was a deep, bone-deep satisfaction in seeing tangible results. Newly repaired fences stretching sturdy and taut, supply shelves neatly organized and accounted for, ledgers balanced to the exact penny, the healthy sheen on the coats, of the growing herd. Mason divided his time, spending several days a week at the ranch, usually focusing on the larger strategic decisions, market negotiations for cattle sales, and pitching in with the more physically demanding tasks alongside. Jed and the handful of hired hands they gradually employed. He respected Emma's domain, the house, the books, the supplies, the daily operational flow, rarely interfering unless consulted. But their paths crossed constantly. They consulted over the meticulously kept ledgers in the evenings, lamplight, casting warm shadows on their faces in the ranch office, formerly Tom's study. They rode out together sometimes, checking on distant water holes or sections of fence line, the silence between them comfortable now, companionable, punctuated by practical observations about the land, the cattle, or the weather. Amidst the relentless, hard work and the shared purpose of building the ranch into a success, the nature of their relationship subtly, almost imperceptibly, shifted. The formal lines of their business partnership blurred, deepening into a genuine friendship built on a foundation of hard-earned mutual respect and unwavering trust. They learned each other's rhythms, strengths, and vulnerabilities. Emma saw Mason's fierce, quiet loyalty to those he considered his own, Jed, Mrs. Gable, who had gratefully stayed on as housekeeper, even Vivian back at the Silver Dollar. She saw his quiet acts of generosity in town, often done without fanfare. She also sensed the lingering solitude beneath his capable exterior, the self-reliance forged by years spent navigating the rougher edges of the frontier. Mason, in turn, saw beyond Emma's initial reserve and physical limitation to the sharp, resilient intelligence that drove her. He saw her quiet modesty, her gentle kindness towards Mrs. Gable and the sometimes rough ranch hands, and the unwavering determination that allowed her to push past the persistent ache in her leg day after day without complaint. He saw the grace that resided not in effortless movement but in her spirit. The lingering awkwardness of that first dance at the Silver Dollar faded completely, replaced by an easy, comfortable companionship. Sometimes, on quiet evenings after, the dinner dishes were cleared and the hands had retired to the bunkhouse, Mason would linger by the fireplace in the main room, nursing a cup of coffee, talking. He spoke not often but with growing openness about his own past, lean years spent prospecting for silver in Colorado, working on noisy Missouri riverboats, the slow, patient saving that eventually allowed him to buy the Silver Dollar, seeking a place to put down roots. He spoke of the rawness of the West, its brutal indifference but also its breathtaking opportunities for those willing to risk everything. Emma, emboldened by his trust, shared more about her life in Boston, not just the constraints and disappointments she'd fled, but also her deep love for books, her intellectual curiosity nurtured by her gentle father, the quiet strength she had, cultivated in the face of societal expectations. One crisp autumn evening, the air sharp with the promise of colder weather, they sat together on the porch swing, a rare moment of stillness after a long day overseeing the fall roundup. The sunset painted the vast Montana sky in breathtaking streaks of orange, pink, and deep purple. The comfortable silence stretched between them, filled only by the chirp of crickets and the distant lowing of cattle settling for the night. Mason finally broke the silence, turning to her, his usual directness softened by the twilight. "Emma," he said, his voice quieter than usual, carrying a new note of seriousness. "This partnership, this ranch, it's working. Better than I even dared hope when I proposed it." "We make a good team, Mason," she agreed sincerely, looking out at the land that now felt improbably like home, a home she was actively, tangibly building with her own hands and mind. "Yes," he said softly. "Yes, we do." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts, his gaze fixed on the darkening horizon before turning fully towards her. "Maybe," he hesitated, searching for the right words. "Maybe we could be more than just business partners." Emma's breath caught, somewhere between her throat and her chest. Her heart gave a sudden hard thump against her ribs. She turned slowly to look at him, finding an unfamiliar vulnerability, a flicker of uncertainty, in the depths of his usually steady blue eyes. "I've come to care for you a great deal, Emma," he continued, his voice low but clear, his gaze holding hers captive. More than just a partner, more than just a respected friend. I admire your strength, your mind, your resilience. I respect you more than any woman I've ever known." He took a breath, the words coming more steadily now. "And I think I'm falling in love with you." The declaration hung in the cool evening air, stunning in its simplicity and sincerity. Her heart hammered, a wild bird trapped in her chest. She had felt the growing connection, the deepening affection, the comfort of his presence, but hearing him voice the words aloud, explicitly, was something else entirely. She thought fleetingly of her past, of the rejections, the pity, her carefully guarded heart, her perceived inadequacy. Yet here was Mason Reed, pragmatic, observant, grounded Mason Reed, who knew her completely, limp and all, who had seen her at her lowest point and witnessed her daily struggles and small triumphs. He wasn't offering pity or convenience. He was offering love. "Mason, she began, a maelstrom of emotions, surprise, fear, hope, gratitude, overwhelming her ability to form coherent sentences. "You don't have to answer now," he said quickly, perhaps sensing her turmoil. "Take your time, think about it, but I wanted you to know. Needed you to know how I feel. And Emma," he added, his voice firm again, "whatever you decide, our partnership stands. My respect for you, our work together here, that doesn't change. Understand?" But she didn't need to think. Not really. In the months they had worked side by side, shoulder to shoulder, building something tangible from Tom Harrington's legacy and their own combined efforts, relying on each other through challenges big and small, her own feelings had quietly, steadily, taken root, growing as strong and resilient as the prairie grasses around them. She admired his fundamental fairness, his quiet strength, his unexpected kindnesses, his unwavering belief in her capabilities. She felt safe with him, truly seen by him, valued by him in a way she had never experienced before. The fear was real, a conditioned response from past hurts, but the hope, the rightness of it, felt stronger. "I don't need time to think, Mason," she said softly, finding her voice meeting his intense gaze in the gathering darkness. A tentative smile touched her lips. "Because I've come to care for you too. Very much." A slow, wide smile spread across Mason's face, transforming his usually serious features, reaching his eyes and making them shine even in the dim light. He reached out, not for a handshake this time, but to take her hand, his calloused fingers closing gently but firmly around hers. They sat in comfortable silence for a long while as full darkness descended, the stars beginning to prick the velvet sky. The future no longer felt like a terrifying blank slate or a fragile gamble, but a shared horizon, waiting to be explored together. Their courtship, like the couple themselves, was practical, unadorned, woven into the fabric of their busy lives. Stolen moments amidst the never-ending ranch chores, a shared glance across the corral, a lingering touch as he handed her a ledger. Shared meals in the ranch house kitchen that felt less like business meetings and more like quiet dates. Evenings spent not just poring over accounts but talking by the fire, sharing stories, dreams, and the comfortable silences that speak volumes between two people who understand each other. Mason formally proposed a few months later, during a quiet walk along the creek that bordered their property. There were no flowery speeches, just a simple, heartfelt declaration of his desire to spend the rest of his life with her, building their future together, right here, on the land they both now loved. Emma accepted without hesitation, her heart, full to bursting, the quiet joy a stark contrast to the desperation that had first brought her west. Their quiet, burgeoning happiness, however, was abruptly interrupted by news from the east. A telegram arrived, delivered by a breathless boy on horseback from Willow Creek. The stark message conveyed grim tidings. Emma's father was gravely ill, his condition deteriorating rapidly. His physicians held little hope. Guilt and a wave of cold worry washed over Emma. She hadn't seen her family since her ignominious departure months before. Her letters home had been carefully constructed narratives, presenting a picture of quiet competence and modest success as a bookkeeper, later mentioning the ranch partnership matter-of-factly. She had omitted the initial abandonment, the scandalous detour through the silver dollar, and had never explicitly addressed the limp she had always tried to minimize in their presence, allowing their assumptions to stand. The thought of her gentle, beloved father dying without knowing the full truth of her life, the challenges she had overcome, and without meeting the man who had become the center of her world, was suddenly unbearable. Mason, seeing the stricken look on her face as she read the flimsy yellow paper, didn't hesitate. "We'll go," he stated simply, decisively. "Right now. Pack what you need for the journey. I'll wire the station agent in Miles City to arrange passage on the next eastbound train and have Jed handle things here." There was no question, no discussion of the inconvenience or expense. Her need was his priority. The long journey back east was a jarring contrast to her westward voyage fueled by desperation. This time, she wasn't fleeing shame and seeking refuge. She was returning with a defined purpose, a measure of hard-won confidence and, crucially, with Mason steadfastly by her side. Yet apprehension gnawed at her. How would her family, steeped in Boston's rigid social codes, react to Mason, a Western dance hall owner turned rancher, a man whose calloused hands and plain-spoken manner were worlds away from their polished circle? How would they react to the unvarnished truth of her life, including the full reality of the limp she had spent years trying to downplay or conceal? Boston, when they finally arrived, felt strangely diminished, claustrophobic. The once imposing brownstone houses seemed merely confining after the vast open horizons of Montana. The air felt thick, heavy with unspoken expectations. Her mother greeted them at the door, her relief at Emma's arrival warring visibly with a barely concealed critical appraisal of Mason's western-cut suit and his quiet, observant presence. Her siblings, summoned for the occasion, were polite on the surface, but their questions about Montana were tinged with an unmistakable condescension, their glances towards Mason subtly dismissive. The familiar atmosphere of quiet judgment settled heavily upon Emma, threatening to suffocate the fragile confidence she had nurtured. But seeing her father rallied her spirits. He was frail, confined to his bed, his breathing shallow, but his eyes, though clouded with illness, lit up with genuine joy when he saw her. He grasped her hand, his grip surprisingly strong for a moment. "Emma," he whispered, his voice thin but clear. "My dear girl. You came." Introducing Mason was a tense moment. Emma watched her mother's lips purse, saw her brother's raised eyebrow, her sister's overly bright, assessing smile. The air crackled with unspoken questions and judgments, but her father, despite his weakness, looked at Mason with keen, intelligent eyes, bypassing superficialities. He asked pertinent, insightful questions, not about society connections, but about Montana, about the challenges of ranching, about the land itself, and most importantly, about his intentions towards Emma. Mason answered directly, honestly, without bluster or apology, his quiet confidence and inherent integrity shining through. He spoke of the ranch not merely as his possession, but as their shared endeavor, emphasizing Emma's crucial role, praising her intelligence, her resilience, her business acumen. He made no secret of his background owning the silver dollar, stating it as a simple fact, nor did he apologize for it. Crucially, Mason seemed utterly unfazed by Emma's limp, which was more noticeable now due to the fatigue of the journey. He offered his arm naturally when they walked, adjusted his pace without comment, treating it as a simple fact of her being, neither ignoring it nor drawing undue attention to it. His easy acceptance, coupled with his obvious deep respect and affection for Emma, seemed to disarm her father completely, cutting through the layers of Bostonian expectation. One afternoon, when Emma was sitting alone by her father's bedside, he patted her hand weakly. "That man, Mason," he said, his voice gaining a surprising measure of strength. "He's a good man, Emma. Solid right through. Like the mountains out there, I imagine." He paused, catching his breath. "He sees you, daughter, truly sees you. Not like those polished fools here who only saw what was missing. A single tear tracked a path down his wrinkled cheek. I worried so much after you left. I worried about you being alone, unhappy, struggling, seeing you now. Knowing you've found not just work, but partnership, happiness. It's more than I dared hope for. He glanced towards the door where Mason had just stepped out briefly to speak with the doctor. Don't let him go, Emma. He's worth more than all the fortunes in this city. Knowing her father's time was short and deeply desiring his blessing on their union, Emma and Mason made a swift decision. They were married quietly, simply. 2 days later, right there in her father's sick room. A minister was procured hastily. Her mother and siblings attended, their expressions a mixture of stunned surprise and grudging resignation. Her father, propped up on pillows, his face illuminated by a weak but radiant smile, held their joined hands tightly after the vows were exchanged. It wasn't the wedding Emma might have once vaguely dreamed of in her youth, but standing beside Mason, feeling the warmth of his hand, receiving her father's heartfelt, whispered blessing. Be happy, my children. Felt profoundly, unequivocally right. Her father passed, away peacefully 2 days after the quiet ceremony, holding Emma's hand, Mason standing steadfastly on the other side of the bed. Though heartbroken by the loss, Emma felt a surprising sense of closure, a quiet peace she hadn't anticipated. She had faced her past, bridged her two worlds, however imperfectly, and received the acceptance and blessing that mattered most. The return journey to Montana felt like a true homecoming. Stepping off the train, not at Willow Creek this time, but at the slightly larger hub of Miles City to pick up supplies, and then traveling the familiar dusty road back to the ranch, felt like returning to solid ground. Arriving at the ranch house, crossing the threshold not just as a partner but as Mason's wife, Emma felt a deep, anchoring sense of belonging she had never thought possible. They settled into married life seamlessly, their existing partnership deepening and expanding to encompass every aspect of their lives. The Reed-Wilson Ranch thrived under their joint management and hard work. Jed remained their loyal, indispensable foreman, his initial gruffness towards Emma long replaced by staunch respect. Mrs. Gable kept the household running with warm efficiency, clucking over Emma like a mother hen. The rhythms of the seasons, planting vegetable gardens, calving, branding, haying, the fall roundup, became the rhythms of their shared existence. Within a year, their joy deepened immeasurably with the birth of their son, Henry. He was a healthy, robust baby with his father's clear blue eyes and a thatch of dark hair, and already displaying a determined spirit that Emma recognized with a smile. Holding him in her arms in the familiar ranch house, watching Mason cradle him with an awkward but profound tenderness that softened his rugged features, Emma felt a sense of completeness, a richness of life that felt utterly miraculous. The lonely, frightened, desperate woman abandoned on the Willow Creek station platform felt like a ghost from another lifetime, another world. She was Emma Reed now, wife, mother, partner, mistress of her own destiny, firmly rooted in the wild heart of the Montana landscape. Life was undeniably hard, demanding constant vigilance and backbreaking work, but it was full, vibrant, and undeniably, gloriously hers. Their peaceful, industrious existence continued for another year. The ranch flourished, their herd grew, and young Henry blossomed into a sturdy, inquisitive toddler who delighted in helping Jed in the corrals and trailing his father around the property, asking endless questions. Emma managed the increasingly complex ranch accounts with her customary precision, her reputation for fairness and shrewd business sense earning respect not just from their hands, but from merchants and fellow ranchers in the territory. Mason, while still retaining ownership of the Silver Dollar, now capably managed full-time by the ever-efficient Vivian Blackwood, poured most of his formidable energy and business acumen into the ranch, his partnership with Emma proving even more synergistic and successful than he had initially envisioned. Then trouble arrived, not with the sudden violence of a gunshot or a stampede, but with the insidious creeping tendrils of legal maneuvering. A man appeared in Willow Creek one afternoon, stepping off the stagecoach dressed in fine Eastern clothes that looked out of place on the dusty street. He introduced himself around town, particularly at the saloon and the general store, as James Harrington, purportedly the younger cousin of the late Thomas Harrington, the very cousin back east who, according to the lawyers, had shown no interest in the property. This man was smooth-talking, possessed an easy charm, and carried an air of urban sophistication that initially impressed some of the townsfolk weary of frontier roughness. He began making casual inquiries about the Harrington ranch, expressing polite, almost sorrowful surprise that it had been sold so quickly after Tom's unfortunate demise. Soon his polite inquiries sharpened into pointed assertions. He claimed the sale, handled by distant lawyers, had been improper, rushed, perhaps even invalid. He hinted darkly that, as the closest living relative, he possessed inherent rights to the land, or at the very least, significant input into its management, particularly concerning the crucial water rights attached to the property, rights that were becoming increasingly valuable as more settlers moved into the territory. Before long, he hired Walter Jenkins, a local lawyer known more for his slipperiness than his ethics, who promptly began filing legal motions and subtly spreading rumors questioning the legitimacy of Mason and Emma's purchase and hinting at potential future disputes over water access. Mason and Emma were initially dismissive, secure in the knowledge that their purchase had been conducted legally through the official estate settlement process, handled by a reputable Boston law firm. But James Harrington, abetted by the Weasley Jenkins, was persistent and cunning. He produced documents, letters purportedly written by Thomas expressing familial affection and hinting at keeping the ranch in the family, birth records allegedly proving his close kinship. Doubt, like a noxious weed, began to fester in the small community. Water was the lifeblood of the plains, and the suggestion that an outsider like Reed, however respected, might have acquired control of the vital Harrington water rights through questionable means stirred old tensions and latent suspicions. Some townsfolk, swayed by Harrington's smooth talk or Jenkins's legal threats, began to regard Mason and Emma with cooler expressions. Mason's usual calm began to fray at the edges. The attacks felt personal, insidious. "Something's damn well not right about this, Emma," he muttered one evening, spreading Jenkins's latest legal filing across the sturdy oak table in their office, his brow furrowed. "This cousin appears out of thin air, precisely when the ranch is starting to turn a real profit after years of us pouring sweat and money into it. And these documents he's waving around." Emma, her meticulous mind instinctively seeking order and truth amidst the chaos, leaned closer, adjusting the lamp. She examined the copies of the documents Jenkins had brazenly presented. "This letter," she murmured, tracing a line with her finger. "The signature looks like Thomas's at first glance, but look here, Mason. The loop on the H in Harrington. It's tighter, more closed than in any of the letters I received from him during our correspondence. And the capital T has a flourish his never did." She pulled out the packet of letters Thomas had sent her months ago, carefully preserved. Comparing them side by side, the discrepancies, though subtle, were undeniable to her sharp eyes. And this birth record he produced. It lists a county in upstate New York. Thomas mentioned his family was strictly Boston-based for generations back. Small inconsistencies, perhaps easily overlooked individually but taken together, they began to paint a picture not of legitimacy, but of careful fabrication. They realized they couldn't simply rely on the original sale documents. They needed to actively disprove this impostor's claim. Mason began making discreet inquiries among his oldest acquaintances in the territory, men who had known Tom Harrington well, asking about family details, about any mention of a cousin named James. Jed, loyal and concerned, racked his memory for every scrap of conversation he'd ever had with Tom about relatives back east. He remembered Tom mentioning a younger cousin, yes, but he thought the name was Jonathan, a quiet, bookish type Tom hadn't seen in years. Meanwhile, Emma, remembering the name of the reputable Boston law firm that had handled the estate sale, composed a detailed telegram. It was a slow and expensive process, relaying messages across the vast distance, but crucial. She explained the situation, The appearance of a James Harrington, his claims, the questionable documents, and urgently requested verification of the legitimate heir's identity, his last known whereabouts, and confirmation that no one named James Harrington had any valid claim to the estate. Their parallel investigations began yielding results, reinforcing their suspicions. The descriptions Jed and others recalled of the real younger cousin, Jonathan, painted a picture entirely at odds with the smooth, assertive James currently charming and threatening Willow Creek. Jonathan was remembered as quiet, scholarly, perhaps even shy, not a man likely to suddenly appear demanding a frontier ranch. Furthermore, Mason learned through town gossip, confirmed by a quiet word from Vivian at the Silver Dollar, that Walter Jenkins, the lawyer, had recently, inexplicably, settled several long-standing substantial gambling debts and had been seen flashing more cash than usual around town. The decisive breakthrough came nearly a week later, via a crackling telegraph wire from Boston. The law firm replied unequivocally. They confirmed the sole heir who had formally relinquished all claim to the Montana property was indeed Professor Jonathan Harrington, currently residing and teaching at a university in Philadelphia. They provided his precise address. More importantly, they stated categorically that Thomas Harrington had no known close relative named James. The man swaggering around Willow Creek, casting doubt on their title and threatening their livelihood, was an imposter. Armed with this definitive information, Mason and Emma finally understood the full scope of the plot. The imposter, whose real name they suspected they'd soon uncover, was likely a grifter, perhaps working in concert with the newly flushed Jenkins. Their aim was clearly fraudulent: leverage the forged documents and the community's sensitivity over water rights to either extort a costly settlement from Mason and Emma, illegally gain control of the invaluable water access associated with the ranch, or perhaps even attempt to seize the ranch itself through protracted, expensive legal chicanery, hoping to wear them down or bankrupt them. "We need to expose him," Emma declared, her quiet voice firm with resolve. "We need to find the real Jonathan Harrington. His testimony, proof of his identity here in Willow Creek, will shatter this entire scheme." Mason acted swiftly. He composed another detailed, urgent telegram, this time addressed directly to Professor Jonathan Harrington in Philadelphia. He laid out the entire situation, the impersonation, the fraudulent claims being made against the property purchased in good faith, the potential damage to his late cousin's legacy and name, the threat to Mason and Emma's livelihood. He implored the professor to come to Montana immediately, offering to cover all travel expenses generously. It felt like a long shot. Would this reclusive, scholarly man be willing to undertake such an arduous journey across the continent to defend a property he had already willingly given up, simply for the sake of truth and justice? The wait for a reply was agonizing. Days crawled by. Meanwhile, the impostor, emboldened by the lack of immediate decisive refutation and perhaps sensing hesitation, grew bolder. He began talking openly in the saloon about reclaiming his family, legacy, and made thinly veiled threats about filing injunctions to restrict the Reed Wilson Ranch's access to water from the shared creek come spring. Tension in Willow Creek mounted palpably. Neighbors eyed each other with renewed suspicion. Jenkins filed yet another motion, demanding access to the ranch's financial records. Then finally, the reply clattered through on the telegraph. Jonathan Harrington, genuinely shocked and morally outraged by the news of someone brazenly impersonating him and attempting to defraud the people who had honestly purchased his late cousin's property, confirmed he was on his way. He expressed a quiet determination to see justice done and protect his family's name. His arrival a week later caused a considerable stir in Willow Creek. Professor Jonathan Harrington was the absolute antithesis of the man who had stolen his name. He was slight of build, wore spectacles perched on his nose, carried a worn satchel full of books rather than projecting swagger, and spoke with quiet academic precision. He met immediately with Mason and Emma at the ranch, expressing his sincere apologies for the trouble caused by the impostor. He carefully reviewed the fraudulent documents Emma had identified, quickly pointing out further subtle inaccuracies based on his intimate knowledge of family history. He readily, even eagerly, agreed to confront the man usurping his identity and set the record straight publicly. The confrontation was arranged to take place in the office of the town sheriff, Bart Logan, a sturdy, no-nonsense man whose initial neutrality had shifted to deep suspicion as the James Harrington saga unfolded and Mason discreetly shared his findings. Mason, Emma, Professor Harrington, the imposter, whose confidence seemed to falter slightly under the sheriff's stony gaze, and a visibly sweating Walter Jenkins were all present. The air in the small office was thick with tension. Professor Jonathan Harrington calmly, methodically presented his own identification, letters from his university, correspondence from the Boston law firm, even an old photograph of himself with his cousin Thomas taken years ago. He pointed out with quiet, irrefutable logic the inconsistencies and outright forgeries in the documents Milburn, as they now knew the impostor's real name to be, Edward Milburn, a known confidence man from back east, had produced. Milburn blustered, attempting bravado, then resorted to threats, but his facade crumbled rapidly under Jonathan's quiet certainty, the weight of the evidence, and Sheriff Logan's stern, pointed questioning. Jenkins, seeing the entire scheme collapsing around him, frantically tried to distance himself, claiming he was merely representing his client in good faith. But Mason then produced evidence gathered during the wait for Jonathan. Testimony from a stable boy who had seen Jenkins meeting secretly with Milburn late at night, and confirmation from the bank manager of a recent large cash deposit into Jenkins's account from an untraceable source shortly after Milburn's arrival. Faced with irrefutable proof, the testimony of the real heir, and the damning evidence connecting him financially to the fraud, Milburn finally broke. He confessed to the entire impersonation scheme, sullenly implicating Jenkins as his willing accomplice, who had helped forge documents, craft the legal strategy, and navigate the local system, expecting a hefty share of the anticipated payout. Sheriff Logan wasted no time in clapping both men in irons, their elaborate plot to defraud Mason and Emma decisively foiled. A collective sigh of relief seemed to ripple through the ranch, and soon after, through Willow Creek itself. The cloud of suspicion lifted as swiftly as it had gathered. Many townsfolk, sheepish about having been momentarily swayed by Milburn's charm or Jenkins's threats, offered apologies and renewed expressions of support to Mason and Emma. Professor Harrington, having performed his unexpected but necessary duty, stayed only a few more days. He toured the ranch with genuine interest, expressed his sincere gratitude to Mason and Emma for protecting his family's name and legacy, and wished them every success before returning east, content that his cousin's property was in strong, honest, capable hands. 2 years later, the dust had long settled, both literally on the prairie and figuratively on the events surrounding the impostor. The Reed Wilson Ranch was more prosperous than ever, a testament to hard work, smart management, and the enduring strength of the partnership at its heart. Another child, a daughter with Emma's thoughtful eyes and dark hair, whom they named Clara, had joined young Henry, filling the sturdy ranch house with laughter, the patter of small feet, and the boundless energy of childhood. Emma stood on the porch one late afternoon. The familiar weight of contentment settled comfortably within her. Much like she had stood on a different platform years ago, lost and alone, she gazed out at the horizon. But now, she wasn't staring into an empty, terrifying void. She was looking out over thriving pastures dotted with healthy cattle, watching Jed patiently show an eager Henry how to properly secure a saddle cinch, seeing the solid, well-maintained barns and corrals that represented security and success. This was her home, built not just of timber and stone but forged in resilience, cemented by partnership and warmed by love. Mason came up quietly behind her, wrapping his strong arms around her waist, resting his chin gently on her shoulder. The familiar scent of horses, leather, and sunshine clung to him. Young Henry, spotting them, waved enthusiastically before turning back to his important task with Jed. "Look at what we've built, Emma," Mason said quietly, his voice filled with a deep, quiet satisfaction that resonated within her own heart. Together. Emma leaned back against his solid strength, the constant, unwavering reassurance of his presence. She thought of the frightened, desperate young woman with the noticeable limp, abandoned and adrift at a desolate train station, thousands of miles from all she knew. She thought of the unexpected kindness of a practical dance hall owner, the steep learning curves, the backbreaking work, the legal battles fought and won, the family they had created against all odds, the home they had carved out and defended, in the heart of the wild, beautiful, demanding Montana landscape. Her journey had been nothing like the escape she had planned when she boarded that train in Boston. It had been harder, infinitely more challenging, but also richer, deeper, and far more rewarding than any carefully constructed fantasy. She had come west, seeking refuge and acceptance, desperate to hide her perceived flaw. Instead, she had found her own strength, forged an equal partnership, and discovered a profound love that saw beyond the surface, recognizing and cherishing the quiet grace within. "Yes," she whispered, a contented smile gracing her lips as she watched her son, felt her husband's arms around her, saw her daughter peering out the window, the vast Montana sky stretching protectively above them all. "We built it together." The future still held the inherent uncertainties and challenges of life on the frontier, but it was a future they would face without fear, side by side, rooted firmly in the land they had nurtured, and in the enduring strength of each other. Mail-order bride with a limp hadn't just found a place to belong. She had, alongside the man who truly saw her, helped create it.